Hello and welcome to the This Works For Me Virtual Summit. I'm your host, Firm Faith Watson. I am the Director of the Faculty Development Center at Murray State University. In this summit, I will be having conversations with individuals who will be sharing practical strategies that have worked for them. And we hope that you will find many of these strategies helpful in your quest to succeed in higher education and beyond. With me today is Dr. Alison Barton. Dr. Barton, I am delighted to have you with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. So now I'm going to yield the floor to you for a moment. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Sure. So I am an associate professor here at East Tennessee State University. We're in Johnson City, Tennessee. And I teach in the Department of Educational Foundations and Special Education. Mostly I am teaching pre-service educators who are going to go teach in the K-12 setting. But my background is actually in clinical psychology and school psychology. So a lot of what I am teaching my students is about the psychology of learning, educational psychology. Through the process of doing that, I have learned more techniques that help me become a better educator myself. And I take that on the road and actually help other educators here at ETSU, higher educators, how to improve their skills. I do a lot of workshops and seminars on campus. I am a faculty fellow at our Center for Teaching Excellence, and I've been designated as an online master teacher here at ETSU. So I'm very happy to share what I know with our other instructors here at the university.
Wow, thank you so much. And I'm just so looking forward to really delving into this conversation deeper with you today. Now, the title of your strategy is Using Guided Inquiry to Facilitate Learning Online Environments. Could you help us understand what is guided inquiry for those of us who are not familiar?
Yeah, it's pretty new to a lot of people, actually. If you were to search for guided inquiry to try to learn about it, you might come across two different bodies of thought about what that means. One type of guided inquiry has to do with students generating their own scientific inquiry and questions as they go. But the other has to do with part of a process that's called POGIL, P-O-G-I-L, and that stands for Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning. I am taking the guided inquiry out of that bigger process, which is a wonderful strategy, by the way. And in that type of setting, and from that body of thought, guided inquiry is about questions that the instructor crafts to guide the learners deeper and deeper into their understanding of course concepts. So they're done in single activities or standalone activities, and typically the questions follow a learning cycle. And that learning cycle starts with exploration, typically of some kind of model. And in the online setting, I often use a video as a model, but you can also use other visuals, and the learner is asked questions simply to explore what is in the model. And then based on that exploration, the next step of the learning cycle is called concept invention, and that is where you then ask them, okay, so how would you define this concept, or how would you explain it? And then they move on to applying that understanding into new contexts. I often also look at two other steps to a bigger learning cycle, engagement and evaluation. So are there ways to engage the learner right as you're heading into the learning activity? Or are there ways to re-engage them in the middle of the activity? And again, I think videos help a lot with that. And evaluation is sort of an endpoint question where the learner evaluates their understanding of the concepts. How well do you feel you've learned it? How are you going to change as a consequence of knowing this information? That may or may not be a relevant question in some topics versus others. But sometimes I include those pieces of a bigger learning cycle as well.
Wow, this really sounds like a useful strategy. And it sounds useful to me, but I'm curious, because there are many strategies out there, why this strategy for you? What impressed you to start using this particular strategy? And how has it been working for you, perhaps in terms of even the students' experience and so on?
Sure. Well, I don't know how other people who teach online feel about or question whether their learners are really engaged in the material or not. That's something that I'm always wondering. I feel like it's always a challenge. And often when I'm asking them the deeper questions in my assessments, I find that their understanding is not always as deep as I would like for it to be. And I often get the sense through some responses that I get or discussions that I'm seeing them talk about the concepts that they are not understanding that you can take several course concepts and they actually interrelate. They tend to treat each thing as a kind of a silo, and as they move on, they forget the old stuff and just kind of move into the new stuff and don't see how those things can impact one another. What I really love about guided inquiry is I can do a couple of things. I can scaffold their learning gradually to help them get to the deeper understandings of the course concepts. Because I think just making that jump from here's the information, now tell me something really deep about it that you understand about it, I can now guide them through a series of questions that gradually get to that deeper level, so that they connect the dots a little more easily that way. I am also able to, through the sets of questions and the concepts that I introduce in the guided inquiry, I can help them to start to see that these concepts can connect to one another, can impact one another. And while I can't, of course, show all of the interrelationships among all of the course concepts, I'm introducing them through a few examples that get pulled into the guided inquiry about how I'm introducing them to the idea that, yeah, these things do actually interrelate, and here are some ways that we can explore that here. Wow. And I do think also that it helps break down the information into more manageable chunks that they're learning about as they complete the guided inquiry. So instead of simply relegating them to reading the textbook, I can guide them to some information from the textbook and help them feel like they're learning it in a manageable and meaningful way with some more engaging tactics embedded in there. So the models, the visuals, I think really help with that. Now, I got interested in doing some research about this because when I built a guided inquiry for the online setting, which is a little different from doing a POGIL on ground, I started doing it as an option for my learners. So my learners got the choice of either participating in discussions or doing the guided inquiry. And what I discovered on a hunch about halfway through the term was that, and I went back and looked at the numbers and kind of crunched them for this one class, so this is anecdotal, my guided inquiry learners were performing a full letter grade better on the exams than my discussion learners were. And I've also gotten a lot of informal, unsolicited feedback, actually right in the guided inquiry worksheets that they turn into me about how much they enjoy the learning process with that. And on my course and evaluations in the commentary, when they're asked what they liked about the course, often the guided inquiries get mentioned. So I am seeing some good anecdotal evidence that learners are a little more engaged and possibly doing a little bit better in terms of understanding the material.
Yes, it seems as if you're having great success with this strategy. So, so
Nothing's great success online, but yeah, it's
yeah.
helping.
So then what would you say? Well, perhaps I should say there are no obstacles then, there are no challenges. It sounds like everything is perfect. Are there any challenges associated with this?
I have like a list of like 5 things that are definitely a challenge here. So I told you that I was interested in doing research, and when we first met to talk about this, I hadn't been able to crunch the numbers and the data yet, but I have been able to do that since we talked. One thing that's really interesting is it seems like individual learner differences may make a difference in how much they learn from a guided inquiry as compared to something more traditionally done online, like a video. And the difference that I'm seeing is that learners who have growth mindsets, who are eager for challenge, who value effort, they do better learning from guided inquiry than students who have fixed mindsets, who think that challenges kind of shut them down and don't want to put a lot of effort into them. Conversely, the fixed mindset students learned better from the video conditions. So that might be something to keep in mind, that not everybody's going to learn as well with this method. So maybe offering choices continues to be a good idea in the online setting. The other thing that I think is an obstacle when doing this online is that when we do these on ground as a full POGL, and the PO stands for process oriented, and that's the collaborative aspect of this. So in an on-ground classroom, you would do these in teams, and you would work on time management, you'd work on working together as a team. That's the process that they're working on. So they're learning soft skills in addition to learning the course content. What I find happens is that when you do those in teams, there's some self-correction. If a question is misread or the material is slightly misunderstood, you've got 3 other team members who can help you work through that. When I do these individually online, because of the asynchronous nature, it's much harder to have a team aspect to this. And so I get worksheets where those misunderstandings that probably would have been corrected with collaboration are not. And that also translates into me having to give a little more corrective feedback. So it's a little bit of a time management thing for the instructor when that happens too. Now, I want to follow that up. I hope we have the time to do that. A colleague of mine has come up with a potential solution to that, and I need to find out how it's working for him. But he has the students do individual guided inquiries, but then sets up a discussion board, and they are assigned into teams. And for sort of the big ticket questions, you have to have done the other lead up questions to be able to answer these big ticket harder questions. But for those, say 3 or 4 questions that come up on the guided inquiry, they have to post their answer to their team, and the team has to come up with an agreement about a final answer for those heavier questions, and they submit just those answers for their grade. And I think that's brilliant. I wish I had thought of it first. And so I need to follow up on that. But that may be a workaround to that concern. So I wanted to throw that out to everybody in case you're interested in trying it. I do think that guided inquiries are great for introducing to learners the bigger course concepts, maybe the things you really, really want them to walk away from the course knowing, but you cannot hit all course content in a guided inquiry. They are going to be too long and too bulky. And I'm sure all online instructors recognize that the more you put in terms of assignments online for students, the more resentful they get about all the work they have to do for your class. So what you could easily plug into an on-ground class as part of your course class time together becomes a time commitment for your learners in the online setting. So you don't want to have a whole bunch of guided inquiries. You want to pick and choose the ones that you think are most going to be most valuable to your learners. But having said that, the concern is that sometimes they think that's all there is to learn. So you need to encourage other ways of having your learners also look at the rest of the course material that isn't filtering into those guided inquiries. And I think that's probably all of the big ones.
Definitely, and that's great clarification right there. And I imagine that as you were speaking, we heard the success that you have been having with this strategy, and we also heard the obstacles. And let's imagine that someone might be out there saying, well, I think that strategy could work for you, but I'm not quite sure it could work for me, given even some of the challenges. What would you say to someone? What would be some preliminary, even first step to even get one's foot wet into this strategy to even start? What would you suggest?
So what I would really recommend you do is go online, just do a little bit of very short research, look at POGL, and type into Google POGL learning cycle and see what comes up, and maybe try to read a little bit more about what goes into each of those 3 elements of the learning cycle that get emphasized for POGL. And then I would really encourage you to see if you can come up with something short, something that maybe your learners have struggled with traditionally when you're teaching online. And see if you can come up with a very short guided inquiry that just works them through understanding maybe one course concept. Typically, when I do a guided inquiry, I am integrating 3 or 4 big course concepts into one guided inquiry, but I might encourage everyone to just start small and test it out and see if you're finding that that is helping your learners. If you scaffold some questions for them and get them to think through the connections to that deeper understanding, is that helping them? Is it engaging them? Maybe get their feedback on how they liked it, and make some adjustments and see if it is working for you in that context. If you think it is, then maybe you want to expand and look at gradually feathering in more guided inquiries as you kind of go on with teaching the course in future semesters.
Yeah, I really like that. It's so important a lot of time when you're doing something new to start small and really
absolutely
feedback along the way. And so I know you suggested that they go online to really do a little bit of research. Are there any resources that you would recommend to help them? I know you have been kind enough to upload some resources for our viewers. Could you just briefly tell us what that is?
So I'm going to see if I can provide for you one example that I have done of a guided inquiry so that you can get a sense of how the questions are structured, what the models can look like, and how I tend to cycle back. So I know I said the learning cycle goes through application. I often try to go back to engaging the students, go back to a new model and introduce another course concept. And then right towards the end, we get to the really heavy-hitting integrative synthesis types of questions. And you can get a good sense of that if you take a look at the example that I have there. I don't pretend that anything I do is perfect, but it might just give you a springboard into that. And then if you really find this idea interesting, I can't emphasize how much I like the POGL method, and they have a website, www.pogil.org, and you can learn a little bit more there about POGLs, and maybe look at some of the scholarly articles about POGLs, and maybe I'll find a good one also to upload if I can that gives a sense of what goes into a POGL.
Thank you so much. And of course, I'll be linking to those resources because we do have a set of resources for this summit.
Okay.
And, great. So in the last minute or so of this conversation, would you leave our viewers with a challenge or encouragement?
I would encourage, I think you said it correctly. I think everybody should always start small. I've learned the hard way not to not to try to jump in and do everything all at once when you're trying something new. But I actually really encourage you, if you go back to that POGL website, look at some of the events that are coming up. I would challenge you to see if you can get to some faculty development specifically about POGLs, because once you understand the full body of what goes into a POGL, you can understand better if you're thinking about the online environment, what you can pull away and try to make work more effectively in the online environment. But I just say, give it a shot. It's one way to get your students active and get them more interested in what's going on in your class.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Barton, for sharing with us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And for our viewers, I would just encourage you that if Dr. Barton said something that resonated with you today, definitely please feel free to try it out. And I encourage you also to share these conversations with others that you think might benefit from it. All are welcome to subscribe, and so please share it with them. And I invite you also to join us in the next episode of this Works For Me Virtual Summit. See you soon.